Thank you. Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my short presentation. Like Jason said, my name is Nicholas Bradley, and I'm a member of the Department of British and American Studies here at Nagoya University of Foreign Studies. Today, I will talk about the educational philosophies of teachers who are active in English language education. So, here's a short overview of my presentation. I will first talk about some labels that are used to talk about different types of teacher before outlining my small-scale study, emphasis on small, which looks at the educational philosophies of teachers. Then I'll talk about some findings and have a very short discussion. So, what type of teacher are you? What would your students describe you as? What would your colleagues describe you as? Well, with a simple search, it's possible to find a huge number of labels that are meant to differentiate between different types of teachers. And although many are largely self-explanatory, many of these labels often come with explanations that detail and justify the label. So on the screen, we've got some examples, such as the modern teacher, which is a teacher that is usually very open to the use of technology in the classroom, usually under the belief that technology provides a means of enhancing the effectiveness of education. Or we're given labels such as activist teacher, a teacher with a fervor for social issues and who often uses class time to present a social agenda, or even labels like buddy teacher, who aims to occupy a role akin to that of big brother or a big sister. And labeling like this is pretty consistent with the current trend of much of society outside of education, where a complex reality is neatly divided into easily digestible chunks. Yet, as a form of human interaction involving multiple people of multiple backgrounds in multiple settings, the reality in education is infinitely grayer and more complex. So as such, all of these labels likely exist within each of us, with certain ones being more likely to become manifest. Looking specifically at language teaching and the language teaching literature, Scrivener offered three kinds of teacher. The first is the explainer. And the explainer occupies the role of the giver of information in a teacher-centered and highly controlled classroom. And this could be said to be the default or the traditional image or belief of what teaching is and who the teacher is. The second he gives is that of the involver. And the involver loosens control a little due to a belief in a greater need of focus on students that may result from a greater awareness of teaching methodology. Sorry if there's an airplane noise, I am under the flight path. And the third kind is the enabler. And the enabler often takes direction from the needs and wants of students, and often does this in real time. The enabler teacher is rarely viewed as or used as a dispenser of information, but is understood more through metaphors, such as being a guide or a facilitator or a helper. And with the teacher stepping back and allowing students to take greater control, the psychology that influences classroom dynamics becomes of greater importance. So, like the labels before, Scrivener makes the point that all teachers are each of these at different times, depending on the circumstance. However, I would add that the likelihood of how often we wear our explainer, involver, or enabler hats is not simply down to the situation teachers find themselves. Personality, age, experience, education, and so on are likely to impact this. So too are their fundamental beliefs regarding education. Why they believe they are in the classroom, how they feel they should act or be as a teacher. The educational philosophy that all teachers have, whether they are conscious of it or not. So, educational philosophies. I don't believe going down the rabbit hole of philosophy will be of any benefit here, and nor am I a philosopher equipped to be able to do so. So I would just like to focus on two areas of educational philosophy. Excuse me. The first being the epistemic aims of education. The question of what we are there to do, what knowledge are we there to give? Now, of course, at its most basic, an English teacher is there to teach English. But some would suggest that education has a socio-political function, helping to cultivate moral citizens and align characters and personalities with the larger expectations of society. Another view of education is that in addition to teaching specific subject knowledge, education is there to develop the cognitive abilities of students. That the process of education develops lifelong cognitive skills through which knowledge can be more effectively learned, analyzed, and assessed. In addition, the very idea of the subject knowledge that education is there to provide can differ. In addition to the societal and cognitive beliefs people hold regarding education, if we just consider that education is simply the transference or development of knowledge, then what does this mean in terms of English education, where knowledge in the sense of discrete pieces of information exists simultaneously with the need to develop the skill of their application? Well, whatever someone holds as the epistemic aims of education, the next question or part of their educational philosophy will likely be how to go about achieving them. So in an educational philosophy, it's not yet a matter of methodology, but it's more fundamentally a question of how I should be as a teacher, about my purpose as a teacher, my role as a teacher. An example of this can be seen in the work of Rogers and Froberg on screen, who suggest that respect, empathy, and authenticity are of fundamental importance to teaching, particularly as they contribute to rapport. And rapport is something which they identify as essential in successful language education, and which is suggestive of a belief that knowledge is best developed as a collective endeavor. Ultimately, though, what is understood to be of fundamental importance to teachers differs greatly and is connected to beliefs on what we are there to give students or do for students. So, onto my little project, emphasis on little. I undertook this project because I was curious to see what language teachers highlighted as being of fundamental importance in their profession. Now, as a small investigation to satisfy my own personal curiosity, I didn't embark on the venture with a specific research question, but rather just with an interest in seeing what teachers say. However, if I were to write a specific research question, it would be along the lines of the one that's on screen. What do language teachers believe as being of fundamental importance in education, being a teacher? So to answer this, or to do this, I looked at paragraphs that teachers wrote about their educational philosophy. The paragraphs were written for a different purpose and different project, and teachers were only asked to write a paragraph under the title of My Educational Philosophy. There was no required length, and the paragraphs differed in size considerably, with the average length being 108 words. After receiving the paragraphs, I conducted a content analysis with common themes being identified and coded. I conducted the stage one, the initial analysis, simply as a result of my own curiosity. However, following coding, I became curious further to see how students might score the coded items in terms of importance. As such, items were put to students in a survey, and a simple survey was given in Japanese and English, and asked students to select 2 items they see as being the most important, as well as the 2 they see as being the least important English teacher. They were also asked to score each item in terms of importance on a 5-point Likert scale. And a total of 257 student responses were received. So the results. For ease of presentation, I will present coded items that emerged from teachers' educational philosophies in terms of a list of things that a teacher should do. So, teacher should motivate learners. The teacher should act as a guide or mentor for students. The teacher should encourage collaboration. The teacher should create a comfortable atmosphere that allows students to be themselves and open up. Teacher should be pedagogically flexible. Teacher should develop critical thinking. Teacher should develop intellectual curiosity. The teacher should create a comfortable atmosphere for ideas. And a teacher should be a reflective and learner. So the list also shows the frequency with which the elements featured in teachers' philosophy. Here we can see that being a motivator and acting as a guide or mentor for students were beliefs most commonly found within teachers' teaching philosophy paragraphs, whereas being a reflective practitioner was the least. So for the survey, for the student survey, I actually merged 2 pairs of items due to their similarities. And the items that were given to students were as follows. So I'll just give you a minute to read through these items. The number at the end of each item shows the frequency with which it appeared in teachers' educational paragraph. And as you can see, The first two items are a result of a merger of two similar items. These were the items that were given to the students in English and Japanese on their survey. Okay, survey results. Well, here we can see which items of the teacher's philosophies were most strongly endorsed by students. And as you can see, the creation of a comfortable atmosphere and the motivating of students are overwhelmingly seen as the most important by students. On the opposite side, although there is a little bit more of an even distribution, we see that elements that focus on a teacher and that a teacher should be reflective and flexible in their pedagogy are not viewed as important by students. Neither is the development of critical thinking and intellectual curiosity, which is actually viewed as the second least important. So, when looking at all items individually, it is important to highlight that all were viewed as being more important than not. However, there was a lot of difference between items in terms of the strength of endorsement from students. Items such as a teacher should motivate students, the teacher should create a comfortable classroom atmosphere, and to a lesser degree, the teacher should encourage collaboration, all scored in a similar way to the chart shown here, with most responses being in the extremely important category, and then the frequency of responses cascading downwards, the final option of not important, which did not receive a single vote from students, these items. Other items, such as a teacher being a mentor or guide, teacher using different methods depending on the situation, or a teacher being reflective, had a distribution similar to that of the importance of a teacher developing critical thinking that is shown here. Whereas overall, students viewed it as important, there is a high degree of ambivalence and a significant number who seem to question its importance. So, although I undertook this small project simply as a means of satisfying my own curiosity, rather than being guided by specific research questions, there are certain findings that do stand out. Perhaps the first is that paragraphs from teachers on their educational philosophy focused overwhelmingly on their role as a teacher and not on education or the subject they teach. Though it can be said that some of this is implied in their thoughts on their role as a teacher. Perhaps the only exception to this are mentions of elements connected to the development of critical thinking and intellectual curiosity, which suggest that what they are there to do extends beyond English language development. When it came to English language development, the paragraphs from teachers suggest that as a group, teachers envision themselves in the role of enabler rather than involver or explainer. Of course, the reality in the classroom might be different, but the paragraph suggests an endorsement of the enabler type of teacher and the desire to be a teacher in that mold. When looking at students' views of the different elements, it's perhaps no surprise that they typically selected items that had a clear connection to them as students, motivating them, creating a positive atmosphere for them, encouraging collaboration and so on. Yet when scoring items individually, the overwhelmingly strong endorsement of items like collaboration and creating an atmosphere where they can exchange opinions freely shows that students seem to be active participants in the classroom. And by extension, that the enabler or involver teacher is preferable to them, just as it was in the views of teachers. Ultimately, there would appear to be a great deal of agreement between teachers and students as elements of teaching philosophy that involve greater interaction between classroom members and elements that focus on developing the conditions that allow these are given the greatest weight by teachers and students. Not all is in agreement though. The idea that education involves some form of cognitive development beyond students simply acquiring subject knowledge was a common feature of teachers' philosophies. This focused mostly on the notion of the development of critical thinking. Although the idea of this as part of education has long existed, it has much more recently become seen by many in the profession as a goal of language education. And this can be seen in the common use of the term critical thinking on many EFL textbooks used today. Though I would suggest the inclusion of critical thinking development would seem to be prudent, especially if a course follows a content-based approach. I do not wish to mention this to create a debate here on critical thinking in language teaching. I mention it simply because the results of the study would seem to suggest a great gulf in teachers and students' beliefs regarding it. The critical thinking labels that adorn textbooks would seem to be there to attract the teacher rather than the student. Of course, one could argue that the students not really seeing the importance of critical thinking development in their language education is precisely a reason for its inclusion, and that in the end, the teacher knows best about education. However, the results would seem to suggest that critical thinking is not viewed by students as something of great relevance to language education. And so mention of it in class or on textbooks or in course syllabi is likely to have little impact on students or interest for them. Okay, so that brings me to the end. So from my small study, emphasis on small, many other questions were raised that are of great interest to me and perhaps will lead me to follow up in the future. Questions such as how have these teachers arrived at these philosophies? What influenced them, when, where, and how? Is their educational philosophy consistent across different subjects? What degree is their philosophy mitigated by contextual features? And is it possible to view their philosophy through their teaching? That brings me to the end of my talk and pretty much my time. I hope the information I've provided gives food for thought and makes us as teachers reflect on our own fundamental beliefs as educators and how these might overlap or might be at odds with those of our students. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Bradley. If anybody could unmute, let's give him a round of applause. Thank you very much for coming to present to us. We do not have time for a Q&A, but I imagine if anybody does have any follow-up questions, they are welcome to contact you, or maybe we'll open up the main room at the very end after the final presentations are over for maybe some breakout Q&As or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody's free to contact me. In terms of Q&A, there's not really any questions to answer because I'm not putting forward a position, just putting forward, this is what I found, which is of interest.
And there's your timer. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. Again, thank you very much. That was great. Thank you. All right.